Take my yoke upon you. Learn from me, for I am gentle and humble of heart.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and they asked him, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" Jesus called a child whom he put among them and said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever becomes humble like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. Take care that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you, in heaven, their angels continually see the face of my Father in heaven. What do you think? If a shepherd has 100 sheep and one of them has gone missing, does he not leave the 99 on the mountains and go in search of the one that went astray? And if he finds it, truly I tell you, he rejoices over it more than over the 99 that never went astray. So, it is not the will of your Father in heaven that one of these little ones should be lost. The Gospel of the Lord. Our gospel reading today is taken from Matthew chapter 18, starting from verse 1. The disciples came to Jesus and they asked him, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" Now, when we do Bible study, this text always amazes us about human nature, the competition among us. Today we'll call that jealousy. To be able to understand Matthew 18, verse 1, we have to go back to the previous chapters. So we go back to Matthew chapter 16. In Matthew chapter 16, Jesus gave the keys to the kingdom to Peter, because Jesus asked the 12 a question, and it seems like only Peter got it right. And so Jesus said to Peter, "I give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven." Give you the keys. And then in Matthew chapter 17, the tax collectors came and they came to ask for taxes. Again, Jesus called on Peter and says to Peter, "You go to the river and the first fish you catch, you will find a coin in the mouth of that fish, and you go pay the taxes for yourself and for him, Jesus. And Jesus did not pay the taxes for the rest of the disciples. Between Matthew chapter 16, chapter 17, Peter became very prominent among the 12. And Jesus already had announced to them that they were going to Jerusalem. And their understanding of going to Jerusalem was that they were going to go establish the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven in Jerusalem. And so there was this unhealthy competition among them, and they were arguing who was the greatest. And when they couldn't settle, they had to confront Jesus. And they said to Jesus, our text, Matthew 18, verse 1, says, at that time, the disciples came to Jesus. They decided to confront Jesus, and they wanted Jesus to tell them plainly who was going to be the greatest among them. In other words, who is going to be appointed the leader, because Jesus already told them that when they get to Jerusalem, he will be arrested, he will be tortured, and he will be killed. And so they wanted Jesus to tell them plainly who was going to be the leader. And Jesus did something very interesting. He called a child and put the child among them. And he says, truly I tell you, unless you become like children. Now, in Bible study, we make a distinction. Jesus is not saying, unless you become childish. He's saying, unless you become childlike. Now, what happens usually is that there are some people who say in the church, they want their will, just their own, what they want. They say, okay, this is what I want, done. If it's not their way, they get angry. They throw tantrums because it was not done their way. Now that is being childish. You know, no matter how old we are, we cannot outgrow being children of God. We are children of God. And as children of God, we have to follow the will of God. And so Jesus tells them, he says, if you cannot be childlike to obey, you know, one commentator said that Jesus is talking about children in the of old, that the children of today don't obey, they don't follow instructions, they don't respect. But that is not true. Children always know that they are children. They might probably try you to see how you're going to react. But the essence of what Jesus is saying is we cannot outgrow being children of God. And we find some people also who believe that, well, at my age, I shouldn't be bowing, I shouldn't be kneeling. If I come to church, I don't think I can kneel, I don't think I can bow, I don't think that I can worship. I'm sufficient to myself now, I'm economically sufficient, I have worked hard, I don't need to pray. Jesus says when one begins to think that way, he says they're behaving like in this text, he says, people who behave like that, he says, truly I tell you, unless you change, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, that statement, you will never enter, recalls what God said to the Israelites in the book of Numbers, chapter 20, verse 21. When they crossed the Red Sea, these were people who were slaves in Egypt. They were suffering in Egypt. God sent Moses to them, and immediately they crossed into freedom. They started becoming arrogant towards God. They started complaining. They started throwing tantrums. They started saying to God, we need this, we need that. God was feeding them with manna, and they were saying, what is this? What is this? And God says to them, you will never enter the promised land. And they did not. They did not. All those that came from Egypt, they did not enter the promised land, including Moses that brought them out. A journey that should have taken 40 days. God made the journey to last for 40 years. They all died in the wilderness. It was their children and grandchildren that made it, led by Joshua. Joshua was not born in Egypt. Joshua was born in the wilderness. Joshua, Caleb, and all those who that led them into the promised land were not part of the arrogance. So when Jesus used that statement and says, if you become arrogant towards God, he says, remember Numbers, the book of Numbers, chapter 20, verse 21. God said, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. And so Jesus invites everybody to humility. He says, whoever becomes humble, any people who are not humble cannot worship. Like I said, humility is the first approach towards divinity. We bow, we kneel, we submit our will to the will of God. We worship. We always say that the wise men, they were wise. Some translation call them kings, but they came before a baby and they worshipped, they bowed. They are called wise because despite their status, despite their achievements, they worshipped a baby. And we say it's the same calling that we have, to humble ourselves before God. And he says, let's be like the angels. Jesus here says, I tell you, in heaven, he says their angels are in the presence of the Father in heaven. And what do angels do? The cherubs, the seraphims, they continually worship God. That's what the angels do. The ones that became arrogant were chased out of heaven. Lucifer and his cohorts were dismissed and chased because they couldn't be humble before God. And so Jesus emphasizes to us on the need for humility before God.